The quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
As we all know, yesterday, the majority leader announced that he plans to delay the start of the August recess by 2 weeks. He stated that this delay is necessary in order to, quote, complete action on important legislative items and process nominees that have been stalled by a lack of cooperation from our friends on the other side of the aisle. That's the majority leader's words. I have no problem with the leader's decision. I will happily stay here an additional 2 weeks. I'll stay 3, 4, or even 5 weeks, as long as we have a plan, to address the serious issues that face this nation. My friends, when the Senate completes its work this week, we will have considered a whopping total this entire week of 3 nominations. One of them being a non-controversial district judge nominee on which the majority leader was forced to file cloture. That cloture vote was a unanimous 97-0. Yet we were still forced to burn post-cloture time, 30 hours, before being allowed to vote earlier today on his confirmation, a vote that was again unanimous at 100-0. What? That's the way we're doing business in the United States Senate? I repeat, the vote to stop debate was 97-0 after 30 hours, after we burned 30 hours. Then we were allowed to vote earlier today, a vote that was again unanimous at 100-0. Why? We've got a war on. We've got men and women in harm's way. We've got nominees stacked up. And so we're spending an entire week with 3 nominees. And so with an incredible act of another chapter in Profiles in Courage, rather than say, okay, we'll stay here Friday, we'll stay here Saturday, we'll stay here Sunday, but by God, we're going to do the people's business. We're not doing the people's business. I can't go through all the machinations between the Democrat leader and our majority leader, and I can't, all the to's and fro's and all that. But I'm supposed to go back and speak to a high school civics class and say, I'm happy to be here. I've had a really tough week this week in the United States Senate. My young friends who may want to be engaged in public service someday, and we voted on a district judge, 97-0. 30 hours later, we were allowed to vote on his or her nomination, and the vote was 100-0. That's what the United States Senate is supposed to do? There was no reason why we needed to take 3 days on this nominee. I say to my friend, the Democratic leader, and I say to the Republican leader, this type of obstruction has gone on long enough, and it has to stop. As I said, I'm happy to stay here for the entire August recess to do the work the American people sent us here to do. But we must first have a plan of what we're going to do and how. What are we to say to the American people if we stay here for several weeks, have no legislative plan, and accomplish nothing? We've been in for 6 months now. What have we done? We've done Gorsuch, and we've done Gorsuch, and we've done Gorsuch, and we've repealed some regulations. All of it, my party, in control of all 3 branches of government. I'm not proud to go back to Arizona and talk about that record of non-accomplishment. Right now, we have no consensus on how to repeal and replace the failed policies of Obamacare. I can't tell you the number of hours I have heard the same arguments go around and around and around and around. As far as I know, there's no consensus on how to best to fund the government, no plan to do a bipartisan budget deal, and no path forward on appropriations bills. This is disgraceful. What I'm asking for is simple. If we're going to stay here to work, then let's get some work done. Why aren't we working now? Why aren't we working tonight? There's nominees for the Department of Defense that are before this body. And we're in a war. And what are we doing? We're doing a vote on a district judge that we took 30 hours to discuss. If we're going to stay here, let's get the work done. Let's come in early, stay late, negotiate a health care deal. Let's process important nominations to make sure the administration is adequately staffed so that the executive branch can function. Let's renew FDA user fees to streamline the regulatory process for life-saving prescription drugs. Let's fund the Veterans Choice Program to ensure our veterans are able to access care in their communities. Let's address the debt limit before we default on our payments. Let's debate, amend, and pass the fiscal year 2018 National Defense Authorization Act, and perhaps most importantly, let's get to work on the budget so we can begin moving individual appropriations bills to fund the government and not have to resort to a continuing resolution or an omnibus. To those who may be watching, the fact is that what a continuing resolution is and what an omnibus is, that we have two choices, yes or no. We don't have an amendment. We don't have a way to improve it. We're talking about trillions of dollars, but we're going to wait until we're right at the edge of the cliff, and then my distinguished friends and leaders on both sides will say, you got to vote aye. You got to vote aye because the government is going to be shut down. I'm tired of having that choice. We know it's coming. We know the cliff is there. So what did we do this week? Spent 30 hours discussing a district judge. 30 hours debating a district judge. Is that the right use of American taxpayers' dollars? Have we no shame? The consensus isn't that Senate Armed Services Committee successfully reported out the fiscal year 2018 National Defense Authorization Act 27-0, supporting $650 billion for the base budget for national defense and an additional $60 billion for overseas contingency operations. At these levels, the national defense budget would be $91 billion above the budget control spending cap. To put it another way, there was unanimous bipartisan support for an increase in defense spending of the Budget Control Act cap by more than a quarter of this body. More than a quarter of this body on both sides of the aisle. In one sense, this consensus isn't surprising because after years of budget cuts under the BCA and sequestration, our military faces a serious crisis. As we ask them to do more and more in an increasingly dangerous world, Congress has failed to provide our men and women in uniform with the training, resources, and capabilities they need. I will repeat that. Congress has failed to provide our men and women in uniform with the training, resources, and capabilities that they need. However, simply passing an authorization bill at higher defense spending levels won't solve the funding problems for our military. We know we must pass a bipartisan budget deal to undo the Budget Control Act caps, set an agreed upon budget top line to allow the appropriations bills to move forward. Absent a bipartisan budget deal, we will be stuck with another continuing resolution, which I might add will be below the BCA budget caps for defense. Or worse, we will be facing, guess what? A shutdown of the government. Has it been that long since we had the last shutdown? I've come to this floor several times already this year, demanding that we start negotiating a budget deal. We're 2 months away from the start of the fiscal year. We know that a budget deal must be done. The failure to begin negotiations means we are knowingly driving towards an outcome that will fund our military at levels below the Budget Control Act caps. I don't understand why we haven't started. It's not because we think the BCA levels are acceptable. It's not because we believe there is a way to responsibly fund the government without adjusting the BCA caps. Even our leader, Senator McConnell, has publicly stated we will need to adjust the caps. This leads me to believe that there is only one reason why we are stalling negotiations on a budget deal and forcing the government and our military to start the year on a, quote, continuing resolution, and that is one word, and that word is politics. The same tactic that the Democratic leader is employing on nominations, stalling, is being applied to a budget deal. I find that to be shameful. There's plenty of blame to go around. The White House has also been surprisingly absent. Their own budget submission asked for additional defense spending above the budget control caps and repeal of the defense sequester. But none of that is possible without negotiating a bipartisan budget deal. And yet, we have heard nothing from the White House, nothing. Any budget deal that will pass both the House and Senate and be signed by the President will be extremely difficult to negotiate. That's why we should have started long ago, and we must start now. I've been ready and willing all year to begin working. My door, and I know the majority of my colleagues' door, is open to any senator, Republican or Democrat. But what we really need is for a select group of key members to come together with leadership's blessings to begin negotiating. Unless and until this body gets to work on a bipartisan budget deal, we will continue down the path we've been on for years, lurching from crisis to crisis, no strategy for how to meet our budget responsibilities or fund our national security needs. My friends and colleagues and fellow Americans, we must summon the political courage to do the hard work the American people expect of us, to do a budget the way we're supposed to, a budget that is sufficient to meet the complex threats of today's world. Our brave service members who are facing those threats every single day deserve no less. Finally, Mr. President, every year for many years now, I have taken my time on the 4th of July to have the honor of spending that national holiday in Afghanistan with the men and women who are serving in the military with courage, with sacrifice, and with skill. As part of our activities there, we have a town hall meeting with several hundred of the men and women in uniform who are serving. My friend Lindsey Graham, who occasionally has a good idea once every decade, asked the group, said, how many of you are here not for the first time? Almost everybody in that room raised their hand. He said, how many of you have been here more than twice? 2/3 of them in that room raised their hands. He said, how many of you multiple times? A good number of them raised their hands. The point is that they're out there serving time after time after time, away from their homes, away from their families, working more than maybe 2 weeks in August. And what are we doing? What are we doing for them? There's a lot of things they need. And there's a lot of things that we need to give them. And yet somehow we can't see our way clear, Republican and Democrat, to sit down and do the right thing for these men and women, to do the right thing so that they can win. We now have a new president and a new national security advisor and a new Secretary of Defense. I don't agree with this president very often, but I do know that this president is committed to rebuilding the military and a winning strategy. The strategy for the last 8 years has been don't lose. I know that General Mattis and General McMaster are people who want to win, and they have a strategy to win. And we have to be of assistance to them to provide the men and women with what they need to win. So I asked my colleagues with passion that we sit down and figure out a budget deal, move forward with it, and not spend a week like we're just spending this week with 30 hours in order to confirm one district judge. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk.